Yo, what's up guys, it's Dunmere, Peak 1 ranked SUPERVIVE player, and I have a rundown for you guys here and a tier list for the Steam Next Fest patch notes. Alright, so going right into it, I'm going to start off with doing the more damage oriented characters and then start going into the tankier ones and then the healing ones. So, starting off with our character Shiv here. Shiv has kind of been going under the radar, I think. She is a very engage based character, wants to just jump in on enemies, burn them as a team, and anti-heal them, crush them, stun them up, etc. Right. But there's other characters that have been filling a very similar role in characters like Brawl, Felix, Oath to an extent, and then Jen, you know, formerly called Stalker, now Jen, and even in this last patch, Bishop with her ability to engage. And so when those characters have been getting really, really powerful, Jewel also, Shiv hasn't really being talked about. So what that basically happened, or what that basically caused, is that the other characters are getting talked about, getting focused on, and Shiv hasn't really been getting a lot of nerfs. In fact, she got a pretty hefty buff recently of having her teleportation dagger slow people by 50% when she hits them. And so, you know, that in addition to her huge capability to just destroy a whole team, anti-heal them all, get large AoE stuns with her bolas, and all of that, she's quite powerful. I don't know if she's like quite to the level that she's insane, but I think at minimum I'd be putting her in a high winky face tier. Gosh, I can't believe I made him like this, but I think she's pretty powerful. Like I said, she has very excellent dueling. The sustain that she gets is just kind of insane, and they buffed the vamp items overall, I think. So they're giving her some pretty powerful options with that. And yeah, so honestly, Shiv looking pretty solid. In the right hand, she could even be higher up into this like angry, happy, haunting, winky face category up here at the top. But I'm gonna put her into A for now. All right, Myth. So Myth was like the most powerful character in the game for a while, I think. A couple of patches ago, she and Ghost and Zeph and yeah, those three primarily were just basically like terrorizing the game with their ability to put huge amounts of damage and zonal control and stun capabilities out at range. But they've nerfed her a couple times. And in this last set of patches, they basically butchered her stun ability. Instead of it being tap and then it's basically all the full stun and the full distance, now you have to charge it up to be able to get the range on it. So it's a lot more intuitive now, but it's significantly worse. And you can't just hold it, so you have to charge it up and commit to it. That with HP nerfs too, and the game having characters like Shiv being quite powerful, and the other engage-based characters that I'll talk about in a little bit, that's putting Myth on the lower end of the spectrum here. I honestly think that I would put her generally towards like maybe the lower portions of the smiley face tier. I wouldn't say she's horrible, but I don't think she's particularly amazing. Yeah. So moving on to Jewel. Jewel is quite a powerful character, I think. I know there's kind of perspectives on some people. Some people think that she's, you know, absolutely mind-numbingly insane. Some people think that she's just so weak, and the only reason that they're good is because that Jewel players get any value is because people are bad. But I think Jewel is actually quite solid overall. I don't think she's quite as insane as some people think she is. She definitely scales with skill, and so really good players can get insane value on her with the ability she has to pick a single target and pull them in for a combo, peel herself and knock enemies away, stack up a full team with her ultimate by stacking someone with their primary or one of her attacks and then landing on them with their ultimate. And just having all the dash resets, having the ultimate to completely escape with, which is insanely powerful in the BR. I think she's definitely in like the winky face range. And the only reason I wouldn't put her higher is because other characters that have a lot of sustain and a lot of hard aggro brawl potential are going to be kind of making her worse, right? Because she can play pretty quickly, but she can't play nearly as quickly as Shiv can, or a character like Bishop. So yeah, like she would be on the lower end of winky face tier, I think. Maybe towards the mid, because she still has like strong dueling potential and stuff like that. And if the enemy doesn't hard send on her, she isn't running into like an Oathbreaker, which is her biggest counter, or maybe like a Firefox. Like she can do quite a lot of stuff. Yeah, so moving on. Shrike here got kind of kicked in her metaphorical nuts this playtest. She had been given quite a few like juicy buffs where her scout ward could mark people, and so it could like set her up for a shot with her primary fire, and just deal a buttload of damage without having to hit them twice. And she also was given the ability to level up her nade to level 3 and get 2 of the nades, which is insane, right? And she was like looking like still not amazing because she was dealing with like competing against these characters that can just jump on top of her anyway, you know, that are like really strong, like Felix or Bishop, right? But she was looking kind of okay, but realistically she's pretty darn crap now because they took away her the second charge on her nade, and then they made it so her scout ward can't mark people anymore. And so now the only thing that can mark people is her disengage shot, so her movement ability. And then realistically, if you're using that when someone's right on top of you anyway, you're like kind of it's pretty sus. So Shrike's not looking too hot this playtest, honestly. It might feel like she is, and you know, the lower the ranks are, and the more people just stand there and aren't used to how much damage she can output, the higher she'll go, right? Like in low tiers, like she's really good. But in high tiers, or you know, when you get used to just seeing her and hiding yourself and then just dashing onto her, she'll struggle. All right, now on to Stalker / Jin. Jin, like he would just he's one of these characters that, since they have this powerful capability to one-shot you, they're either just kind of really good or they're kind of just really bad, it feels like. And they're not like often that time, somewhere in the middle. But with Jin, he had a couple of playtests where he was just insanely nutty and people didn't really notice because they didn't play him and he was new. But then he just pop up on you and you wouldn't be able to stop him from like one-shotting you and murdering you. But they nerfed the damage on it and the consistency of being able to land it, so he got nerfed pretty heftily in terms of that. But they also, in the most recent patch notes, make it so his primary fire no longer marks people. So I think he's getting a pretty... I don't know exactly what that means in terms of his other capabilities and stuff like that, but that could be pretty substantial. And I don't... Like a Stalker, Jin, I don't really anticipate being insanely powerful this playtest. I'd see him maybe being like in the smiley range, like okay, like a viable pick, maybe in the bottom half of the winky face range, just because he doesn't have as much of the just raw one shot that he used to. Though this character can do more than it seems because he can use his ultimate as like a poking tool, which is unique, and he can teleport his team in certain ways, or I'm sorry, and teleport himself. And so there's like interesting stuff you can do, and he's not like quite as one faceted as he seems, but he's still not like super amazing. Yeah, he's just kind of okay. Bishop. Bishop is kind of insane. She was a very nuanced character before. You had to really min-max your stuff, and there was always a character that would do better what she wanted to do. Like there were characters that could engage better. There were characters that could escape better. You know, Jewel, right? And like Oathbreaker and Firefox, Felix, Brawl, especially for a long time, could engage a lot better than Bishop could. But they've given her like 3 charges on her dash, and then they've given her the ability to now like reset her punch by hitting people with, or hitting her RMB nade thing. And so you can use that to like chain stun people against a wall if you do it properly, like you hit them out of your ultimate. And that added with like some of these items giving tank ability, like tankiness, a lot more power. She was quite powerful. And honestly, she's still really powerful. And that's why I'm going to be putting her in the higher portions of these ranges here, just because she she just has so much escapability. Her damage is quite solid, though they nerfed the raw damage she gives. So her tank build isn't quite as powerful, and you do have to opt for more damage build to deal more damage. But just before, she was having to like consider when she wanted to engage a lot, and you had to commit to doing it. But now with 3 dashes and then the ability to empower your dash to like always give you a boosted rocket to escape with, that's just making her like kind of insane, to be honest. You just can't catch her. Like, it's just not what she was. Like, you can't catch her anymore. She has powerful ability to engage on you from range and bully you and like stun on you. Her poke's okay, and her punch is like oppressive, right? And her punch is really getting its Oathbreaker. That's also a very strong character right now. So, right. So, Celeste here. Celeste was a must pick for like a really long time in the game, basically. And basically because there was no Oathbreaker in the game, no Oath in the game. But what happened with Celeste is basically really comes down to, is Oath good, right? In part. And then also how much mobility are other characters getting in compared to her. Celeste is very good at holding areas and controlling them, or like basically being a source of threat in an area, right? They nerfed her wall so that her base, her 30-second, sorry, her level 3 wall is now only at a 15-second instead of a 10-second cooldown. So she's not quite as raw powerful as she used to be, but that wasn't the biggest nerf. But what made her go from being like absolute must pick to like where she is now is that she just doesn't have the staying power that an Oathbreaker does now. After all the buffs they gave him, the ability to just dive into a place and hold space. But realistically, really, it's because Oath counters Celeste. A lot of Celeste's power comes from having this ultimate that she can just sit on and then just pop when she wants to, like, really, like, you know, enemy cooldowns are low and like just hold this area and be like, no, you guys need to get out of here or die. Oathbreaker can just deny that by like sitting on top of her and then stunning her out of it as it comes off, and then just blocking that for his team. In addition to, like I said, characters like Bishop getting more powerful. If a Bishop like engages on your team and like, for example, the Bishop just ults and stuns someone on your team, the ultimate from a Celeste isn't going to be nearly as powerful as it once was, because the Bishop just has so much more mobility to escape with. Like Jules' mobility is way higher than it used to be, you know, and like in comparison to like 6 months ago, for example, like Ghost mobility is higher, Brawl's mobility is higher, Felix's mobility is higher, Gunner's is higher, Hudson's is higher. I think basically like nearly the whole roster's movement got buffed to some extent. So basically Celeste isn't terrible, and there's viability to play her if you aren't running into Oathbreakers, or you're getting countered, or like you focus it and you have your team focus it. But comparing it to the consistency of just having a shield that can constantly do much of what Celeste wants to do, but better, she's not in the best place right now. All right, on to Ghost. Ghost actually got some solid buffs in the past playtest or so, like these patch notes. He got his laser increased by 10% damage and the ability to turn it as you're aiming it by increased by 10%. And then he got a buff to his nades, like direct dazing time or stun time, and then the daze duration of his ability increased also. So his nade stronger and his laser stronger. They did nerf his dash, but his dash, if you use the slide, jump, and then release tech, you're on a 4-second CD now for like a full distance dash, which is nasty. It's very powerful. You can't use it, of course, when you jump into the abyss to try and escape, but it's enough, really, and it doesn't really matter that much that it was nerfed, and so that's why he's still pretty solid. But the problem is he is getting a similar kind of issue of being weak against some of these engagement-based characters, and they're like the reason some of these characters that I'll talk about later, like Oath, Felix, Brawl to some extent, and like also Bishop were so powerful in the most recent playtest is because they're using these like some of these busted like stat stick items that were giving them a lot of extra AP off of HP or just mana and stuff like that, while still being able to be really tanky. And so a really tanky character doesn't do well against a character like Ghost doesn't do really well against a super tanky character. He's a lot more looking to like stun up and fry a squishy, and he kind of wants to be able to sit there in neutral and poke at people. So he's in a similar situation of Jewel, where he's like inherently really good, but he's just not as good into like what's currently the most strong. All right, so that's putting him here. Yeah, about here, with like a gap between Shiv. Like Shiv really maybe could be pulling up into the top one, but you know, we'll see about that. Brawl. So Brawl got nerfed pretty solidly before. And he's gotten some buffs. He got some buffs to counteract it. Like his movement was reduced a lot, and then they of his like charge up R&B dash that basically took him out of the meta from being like perma must pick. But then they buffed his damage on like his primary fire swing, so he was kind of doing some okay stuff. But then they've nerfed it more. He's solid. He's a pretty solid counter to like a soft counter to Oathbreaker. So, you know, he might see some more play depending on how much Oath is being played. But with his HP or like with his stats right now and like his capabilities not being like mind-numbingly insane, I just don't see him getting as much play time in comparison to a character like Felix, right? So he's kind of just like okay, but still pretty good. Probably like pretty similar to Celeste, probably better than Celeste because he does fit into the rundown stuff and into the rundown meta type gameplay. So if like a bishop goes in with him, like he can get a pretty decent amount of value. I guess he's probably like around here. All right, so Void is a pretty interesting one. He's a character that's similar to Kingpin in that they don't get like they have really strong inherent weaknesses. With Kingpin's inherent weaknesses like his hitbox size and then his low mobility. But then Void also has the very low mobility, like much worse mobility problem of not having like a dash and only having the TP. But recently they've given him a lot of buffs to like the TP allowing him to float in the abyss, and like that one was a pretty substantial one. And then they buffed like his stun ability, and his damage and how fast he gets like empowered or what he's able to do when he's empowered. So he's gotten like pretty hefty increases and powerful increases to his raw capabilities. He still is inherently problematic, I think, in the terms of how the BR works, just because the BR comes down to being able to survive randomness, essentially, you know, like a random zone pull or a, you know, extra teams showing up, just like being able to survive uncertainty. And so if you're playing a character like Void, even if you're playing well, you know, and you're doing things properly, a team might just like send on you, right, in a really awkward situation and force you into, you know, being in just a bad situation, right? And another character like, let's see something similar, like Celeste, for example, fills a somewhat similar role of being like a controller, of like stopping people from getting on top of you. Celeste will have the ability to escape, but a Void was going to struggle to do that, right? Because if he gets stunned up during his TP, which you can no longer stun him out of it, unless you hit him at the end of it. So that was another side buff they gave him. You have to stun it like right as it goes off. But he doesn't have that flexibility, right? He doesn't have the flexibility to survive that team doing that dumb thing and going on you when they shouldn't, or a crazy zone pull that goes like over a bunch of abyss, right? However, when you give him powers, like you give him like a blink dagger or maybe some sort of other like glider wings or something like that, just an invisibility cloak, he gets pretty strong. And he's always going to lose to people at range, right? He's going to lose to like much of the cast, like Myth, Celeste, Ghost, Jewel, Bishop, kind of, not really Bishop, Zeph. He's going to lose to those characters at range, right? But the characters that are the strongest right now are one that are like close range. And so he has this kind of an awkward, not awkward, but it's a niche, but potentially quite powerful option as a counter to the meta. And being this character that can kind of just sit there, stick around with his team, be given resources by his team, and get some powerful capabilities off to counter the engage of enemies as they go on you, or pull some nonsense pick with like using a blink dagger to TP people into a void bomb. You've already set up a void bomb in your team, and then TP onto that location, and then blink dagger on top of enemies to try and pull them onto it and kill them. And so he can actually like poke pretty decently too. But mainly he's there to like stop people from engaging on you. But since people want to engage in you so much, that's why he's pretty decent at this right now. So, all right. That's why I think like he's actually like could be not meta, I don't think, but pretty solid. All right. Felix. So Felix got a lot of buffs in the past, recently-ish, and then he became a huge beneficiary of other characters like Bishop becoming stronger, and these like general health changes and the time to kill changes and the addition of certain items like Gigantism, which is the upgraded bladed helm that allows you to get bonus damage, bonus AP for HP. And so he's quite powerful, especially after they gave him 2 dashes and then buffed his damage and stuff like it. Anyway, a lot of changes happened, right? But basically, he's really strong right now. He is like the best anti-healing character in the game right now. Competitive with Shiv, and he has this ability to just like push into a team, that like ult into them, spin, terrorize them, get resets on the spin with level 3 spin giving 20% reduction for igniting or applying ignite or upgrading it. And I played him a bunch last playtest, and he just has this ability with like the raw tankiness they've given him too, from those items, to still be cooking people at a faster rate than they can cook you, while being pretty darn safe doing it. And so basically, like, just the way the stat sticks have helped him in the way that like the meta changes against like of countering certain characters that aren't as good at like surviving about people being close to you. Those characters getting some nerfs, like this one not having as much of like a knockback ability on him. A certain character like maybe Kingpin not having as reliable anti-heal, with it having to be upgraded onto his ultimate. But Firefox Felix here has gotten pretty darn strong, and you can literally just like toss yourself on the enemy team. Like, I haven't been describing it that well, but you go on a flank, you see enemies stacked up, and you go, I'm ulting, and you ult into them, and you pull them, and you sit there and you burn them, and like you have your 2 dashes to escape when you need them. He now like knocks people again with his dash and the his like ranged RMB, or I think it's RMB, but the ranged E probably. The ranged firebolt thing, those all boot people now, so you can like cut people out of their dashes and stuff like that. So he's just been given like a raw capability increase over the last few patches or whatever, and also just, you know, was a beneficiary of the way the meta is going and the way that like the stats go too, the stat sticks and the evolving items, sorry. So he's really good too. Yeah. All right, so now we're gonna talk about Hudson / Gunner. This character is a interesting one. I haven't really put a lot of time into him because he's been pretty garbage forever. They reworked his primary fire. He used to have like, you know, this machine gun barrel gun thing, and you would shoot it, and then you would have an overclock that you could use to increase your fire rate, but then slow down your like turn ratio or your turn radius speed. Gosh, my English is struggling today. Your ability to turn, okay? But that is no longer how that works, and this last patch they've made it so he has to charge it up over time, and then he has increased damage at the end of it. So it's basically the same thing, but it's like not an ability. You have to like ramp up into it. So pretty common to other like Gatling guns in other games. But bottom line, even though they gave him 2 dashes too, this character's pretty cheeks, to be honest. He's pretty similar to Void in that he like doesn't have the flexibility that some other characters do, because he has to slow down to shoot people, so he's not that good over the abyss, and like there's just a lot of like nonsense that he has to deal with. And he's very predictable and very easy to kill, like a Kingpin or like Jewel, with just like him having to stand still, like a Void snapping onto him, etc. Yeah, he's just very predictable. And from what I've been told and my interpretations, he's in the very absolute garbage tier category. Shout out to my boy Luke, who is like the only person who plays this character ever, and that's because Luke like enjoys playing bad characters. So all right, yeah, so moving on to my OG boy here, Kingpin, my guy. Kingpin is kind of a unique character in that he, like I said, he's pretty similar to Void in that he gets huge benefits from getting extra powers. You know, you pop a blink dagger on him and he's insane, but if you don't have that sort of thing, then he's not quite as good, and he can struggle from getting dove on by enemies, right? But having said that, and so like he technically benefits from like he usually benefits pretty heavily from like these slower type of metas where you can just sit back and like look to hook people, right? Where now we're in like an engage meta. But with all the engagers going, if he's playing with them, he is given a lot of license to like take and control it just basically not be the focus, right? Like Kingpin gets a lot of value when he's not being focused. And so if you have a Bishop or a Firefox Felix inting into the enemy team first, that opens up your Kingpin to get like on a slight flank, jump into the middle of the fight, slam someone, roll them, or look for a hook to like pull someone and slam them over the abyss, while still just having that ability to hook people in neutral, which isn't as good if you're playing against another brawl based composition. Not brawl like, you know, this guy, but brawl as in like the composition type. Just because the enemies kind of want to be on you in the first place. But with some coordination, you can still get value out of it. However, he also, and probably the biggest reason he's kind of developed to be pretty solid, is he is also a beneficiary of the stat stick increases, and particularly gigantism. And so you're building him tanky, but you're getting like a solid portion out of like the damage that you would have wanted. So I don't think he's insane. I really don't think he's in the crazy angry winky face tier or whatever. I also think people that play Kingpin are just kind of pretty good at him. So, because, you know, I think people that gravitate towards that, gravitate towards characters like Kingpin that are high risk, right? But I still think he's pretty good. So, yeah. Moving on into Oath. Oath is pretty nasty right now. You know, actually I want to put Shiv here. I think Shiv is better than both of these guys though, for sure. Like I think there's a pretty like a gap between these two that Shiv would be in, between Shiv and Kingpin. But anyway, sorry. Oath is very overtuned. I don't think people get nearly as much value out of him as they even could. He has the ability to make his shield invulnerable, to heal that shield up if he messes up and it gets broken, to basically guarantee, not always guarantee, but have a very powerful ability to counter enemy reses, get a res off on his own team. He has a powerful ultimate that's AoE denying and has a stun on it. He can dunk with it too, so he can insta slam people into the abyss even though they're not gliding. He has the ability to dish out like a pretty solid amount of damage even with the tankier build. He has what else does he have? He has the ability to stun people off of dashing people, and like, you know, his shield doesn't let people go through it, so he can counter characters like Jewel really well, and he's just a big counter to Jewel in general. And so having that, like, if you ever walk into a Jewel team and you're playing on Oath, like that Jewel's gonna have to try and do some funky stuff to try and beat you. He just kind of does a lot, you know. I don't know, like he has to like, the only reason he's not like insane is because Bishop is in the meta, can punch him in the face pretty reliably. That's like his biggest counter. But even with that, and like even despite that, like he's still pretty nasty, to be honest. So I think he's like in this range of the best characters in the game right now. All right, onto the bunny. I don't really think Celeste is that crazy. Her best builds were like her tankier builds, where she was just like absolutely miserably hard to try and kill, but they nerfed those out of the game. So like a pretty decent portion, they nerfed a lot of the value out of it, and they nerfed her heal pretty substantially. You know, and so I don't really think she's very good, to be honest. I wouldn't say she's strike tier. I wouldn't even, like, I would say she's probably towards the middle. I think she's viable, but especially in a meta right now where you have characters like Oath, Bishop, Felix. So if you're playing like these three here with like I don't know, maybe another character, if you're playing with like a range, like characters that want to live longer and survive longer, then that's like a lot of what Bunny's really good at, like picking up the characters that get killed and running away with them. But she's not quite as good at, you know, as going with people and then saving them afterwards, because she has to commit her dashes to go in. She wants to have the team, like the enemy team, want to come into her team, that when they die or like shoot at them from range, and then when they die, she can just grab them and run away because they've already used their dashes, right? And so she's not as good at like in a brawl meta as a character like Zeph is. I mean, it's really more like just Zeph just has a lot more to his kit, a lot more stun potential, a lot more damage, knockback. Bunny, if Bunny wasn't pretty heftily nerfed recently, pretty chunked in terms of her healing output, and the viability of her tank builds, I think you could definitely slap a Bunny in with like these 4 guys and then just have the Bunny like just walk up on you, and like anybody that dies, you just like she insta picks up and runs away. And since, you know, whatever these guys are jumping onto are so like focused on surviving, like the Bunny just picks up whatever it is and just runs off, and they like nothing dies and they just reset, right? And then you have 2 healers that are helping each other. But with the raw numbers of her character being pretty low right now, like her healing being low, her damage just being like not amazing, and her root being like not as good of a stun as other things in the game, since you can like dash while it's going off to like go farther, I don't really think Bunny's insane. And I would say Bunny's kind of like there's a reality in which like she's actually super giga juiced, to be honest, and so I hesitate to put her where I'm going to put her, but I think she's around the range of Celeste. I think just like this is kind of like a cool like, oh yeah, what if kind of thing, but you're playing with like 3.5 characters. Like you're playing with 3.5 characters when you do this, and if she was stronger and you're playing with like 3.8, then you know this character like rezzing these guys will bump that number up to like 4.7, you know, I don't know, like 5.5, with like in terms of how much value she's getting by like restoring these people to life in her heals. But I don't think that really happens that often, or that isn't as good as just like having a character like Zeph, or maybe even another like engaged character, right? Or like a Kingpin, or like a Void just doing nonsense in the backline, a Shiv, right? Like these 4 guys just like jumping on you. I don't think the sustain that a Bunny can provide is going to outlast these 4 guys just jumping in your face, and her healing isn't reliable and consistent enough to like survive you over long term. So versus things like this, or even against some of these other poking things. So yeah. All right, and last character, Zeph. Zeph did get nerfed. He got his healing nerfed, so he only has 4 or 3 charges instead of 4 at max, and it's a 20% HP reduction, or 20% healing reduction for each of those charges. Granted, they get like a movement speeds for whoever he cast it on, so he did get buffed in that terms, but he's still just really strong. I think I think his damage is still pretty solid overall. I think and like I look at his ability to dash teams forward and backwards. I look at his stuns with his nade are insane, and his ultimate is one of the best ultimates in the game with how it can peel and res a teammate. Like I just don't think he's bad, you know, even in like an engaged based meta, like that's where it's like starting to get a little bit questionable, and it's like maybe you don't even play the Zeph, maybe you pick another just yeet onto people kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know. I think he's probably around like Kingpin is. Now, you know, having said this, I do have to give a little bit of like a disclaimer of this is about what this looks like. There could be some shifts that I'm not like predicting right now, of just with like how much sustain, or like how much they've modified the time to kill and stuff like that in the game, and how much the feel of like the armor changes in terms of how much damage reduction that's giving now. Like I don't know, never mind. Like the game will be the same, I think, for the most part, because they also have made it effectively so that certain characters can't have as much damage either. So yeah, it's like, oh, they nerfed like HP builds on Oath and Felix and Bishop, but you know, they nerfed Mindblade, and so a lot of people were running Mindblade anyway and getting like a buttload of extra damage, and they were putting that onto like an Oath, Felix, and Bishop, and also Gigantism now gives less AP. So as much as like some of these characters weren't benefiting from this, you know, like Ghoul, Ghost, the like there's still a lot of people using them, right? So it's just kind of like a character like Bishop, for example, and Felix, like they're getting weaker, but not really much. Like they are not getting that much weaker. Some of these other characters are getting like, I don't know. I mean, it's just like you're losing like a tiny bit of value from like gigantism and maybe greed on some of these tankier characters. But even a character like, you know, Ghost, Jewel, whoever, like they were using things like Mind Blade to chunk up a buttload of extra, getting a bunch of extra mana so that they could get extra damage out. But those items aren't being used, so there's not like, as much as there's not these stat stick items that are giving like quite as much extra AP for being tanky, there's also not as many stat stick items that are giving as much, like that are giving just as much like extra damage for being you know, just for having like just for extra damage just because on damage based characters. So yeah, I think this is generally how this would go. If I could see some flexes into maybe I could see Ghost and Jewel taking up, like I could see Ghost and Jewel bumping up into like high Winky face tier, and then it being kind of like perspective based, like do you want to try and like play a little bit slower, like play you know, in Zeph too, playing like Zeph with Ghost, like because the old meta was like Zeph, Huntress / Myth, that character, and then like a Ghost with like a Zeph or like an Oathbreaker. That was like probably the hardest meta at the time. But with nerfs to Myth, like she's out of it, right? And nerfs to Zeph, like it means that like as much as that comp is so powerful, it's not as like, it's now competitive comparatively with like some of these, like these engage based characters that got a lot of buffs are quite powerful too. So maybe you trade out, like you put like a Zeph into this composition, maybe drop like your Firefox, your Felix, and have like Zeph, Bishop, Oath, Ghost or something like that, right? Something that has like the ability to poke at range too, but will also want to like poke people until they're a little bit low and just engage. So yeah, anyway, have fun guys. Feel free to throw any questions into the comments and I will try my best to answer them. Yeah.